I shouldn't have been going through her things. But something about the way she'd been acting lately gnawed at me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. It started small, Maya spending more time away, claiming late meetings at work or last-minute trips out of town. She'd never been that spontaneous before. Not until a few months ago. I'd brushed it off at first, chalking it up to stress, maybe boredom. But tonight, staring at our joint bank account, my hands went cold. It was subtle, just a few withdrawals here and there, spread out over weeks. But the amounts were strange. Not enough to raise alarms, but just enough to feel off. Restaurants I didn't recognize. A hotel downtown I'd never heard her mention. She hadn't said anything about it. Had she even been planning to? My heart pounded as I clicked on the latest charge. The name of the hotel glowed on the screen, mocking me. A boutique place, expensive, on the other side of town. Why would she? No, I thought. Don't jump to conclusions. I stood up, pacing the room, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor as I shoved it back. My mind was racing in circles, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a business expense. Maya was in marketing. Her job took her to client meetings all the time. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But then there was the phone. It was sitting on the kitchen counter where she'd left it, charging. She'd gone to bed early tonight, said she wasn't feeling well. A part of me knew I shouldn't touch it. That part was weak, though, and the pull was too strong. I walked toward it, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle on my shoulders. I unlocked it without hesitation. I knew her passcode. It wasn't even hard to find what I was looking for. A thread of messages hidden under the name Jay. It wasn't long before the text exchange made my chest tighten, my blood rushing in my ears. Jay. Friday, same time? Maya. Of course. Looking forward to it. A simple exchange. Nothing explicit. But it was enough. The formality of it. The way she kept things short, careful. If you didn't know Maya, it would look innocent, maybe a professional meeting. But I knew her. There was a stiffness in those words. The way she avoided any sort of warmth. That wasn't how she talked to her clients, her co-workers. That was how you talked when you were hiding something. I scrolled back, forcing myself to see more, even though I already felt sick. There were more messages, more carefully worded plans. Every Friday. Every week. And then I saw it. A photo taken a few weeks ago. It was Maya, in the same dress she'd worn that night she told me she was out with friends. But she wasn't with friends in the photo. She was in that boutique hotel room, reflected in the mirror, and she wasn't alone. His face wasn't visible, just a broad shoulder, part of a suit jacket. But I could tell he was standing close to her, intimately close. I slammed the phone down onto the counter, chest heaving. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I tried to pull air into my lungs, but my throat felt tight, constricted. There was proof. For a second, I just stood there, hands gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears come. I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not now. Not yet. A wave of nausea rolled over me, and I forced myself to move, to do something other than stand there, drowning in the betrayal. I needed to understand who Jay was. I needed to know how long this had been going on. I needed to know why. Pulling myself together, I grabbed my coat from the hook near the door and slipped out into the cold night air. The city was quiet, the streets empty this late. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe I'd drive to that hotel. Maybe I'd call her out right now. But the anger simmering in my chest was telling me to move, to do something. I knew that if I confronted her tonight, it would blow everything apart. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But I couldn't just sit back and let this fester. I had to find out more. I needed answers before I made my move. As I drove, my thoughts spiraled. What if this was just the beginning? What if there were more secrets, more lies? My mind replayed every moment from the last few months. Every time she'd been late coming home. Every vague explanation. How long had I been blind? How long had she been lying to me? I found myself circling the area near the hotel where the charge had appeared. My heart raced as I passed by the entrance, half expecting to see her standing there, but the lobby was empty. The building loomed over me, a reminder of everything I didn't know, everything I was about to find out. I stopped the car a few blocks away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. A plan began to form in my mind. I needed to follow her. I needed to know exactly what she was doing. I would find out who Jay was, and then I'd confront her. But not before I had everything laid out in front of me, clear as day. Not before I knew exactly what kind of betrayal I was dealing with. I wasn't going to let Maya destroy everything without a fight. The next day, I could barely focus. Every word Maya said felt like a test. Every glance she gave me a challenge. Did she know? Could she sense that something had shifted between us? She acted like everything was normal, smiling as she handed me my morning coffee, kissing my cheek before heading out for her meeting. The warmth in her touch felt hollow, like a thin veneer covering something rotten. I wanted to tear the mask off her face, demand she tell me the truth, but I kept quiet. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I waited until she left. I had a plan now, and I was going to see it through. My mind was already spinning with possibilities, each one darker than the last. But the first step was simple. Follow her. Find out where she was going, who she was meeting. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding as I slipped out the door. I kept my distance as I trailed her through the city, my car blending into the morning traffic. She drove with the same calm, composed ease she always had, no sign of the lies bubbling beneath the surface. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of the same boutique hotel. My stomach churned as I parked a block away, watching her step out of the car. She wasn't dressed like she was heading to a meeting. A simple black dress, heels, her hair swept back. She looked beautiful. She always did. It made me sick. I waited until she disappeared into the hotel before I stepped out of the car. My heart raced, the urge to rush in after her almost overwhelming. But I knew I had to play this smart. If I barged in now, I'd lose my chance to learn the full story. I needed to be patient, even though it was killing me. Through the front windows, I saw her meet a man in the lobby, tall, well-dressed, with a polished look that made my skin crawl. He put a hand on her lower back, guiding her toward the elevator. They were close. Too close. This was him, G. I didn't follow them into the elevator. Instead, I took the stairs, my legs burning as I climbed, my mind racing ahead. What were they doing up there? Was she laughing with him, the way she used to with me? I stopped at the 4th floor, heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, but I could hear faint murmurs behind a closed door. Their door. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I kick the door down and confront them? Should I wait, gather more evidence? Every option felt like a trap. But as I stood there, the door opened, and they stepped out, still together, laughing softly. The rage I'd been holding back surged forward, threatening to drown me. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay hidden as they made their way back to the elevator. Maya was standing too close to him, her hand brushing his. And yet something felt off. This wasn't just an affair. It was more calculated. Their interactions were too controlled, too businesslike despite the closeness. Once they left the floor, I exhaled, barely realizing I'd been holding my breath. I waited a few minutes, then crept back to the door they had exited from. I tested the handle, locked of course, but I'd seen enough. This wasn't just a hotel tryst. It was bigger than that. There was something else going on here. Back in the car, I sat in silence for a long time. The anger I felt earlier had settled into something colder, something more dangerous. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was hiding something bigger than just a lover. I couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing exactly what it was. But I knew now that this man, this Jay, wasn't just someone she was sleeping with. He was involved in something else. And whatever it was, Maya was deeply entrenched in it. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I looked down at the screen, an email notification from my financial advisor. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Attached was a report detailing some strange discrepancies in our accounts. Money moving in and out, but in amounts that didn't make sense. At first, it looked like Maya had been handling it all through legitimate channels, but the patterns were too erratic. My hands shook as I realized the truth. The money, those strange withdrawals I had noticed, they weren't random. They were part of something bigger, something darker. I had to know more. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of suspicion, anger, and fear. Maya came home late again, but I didn't ask where she'd been. I just watched her, studied her every move, every word. She smiled at me like nothing had changed, like she wasn't hiding something that could shatter both of our lives. But now I knew. She wasn't just my wife. She was a liar, a manipulator, and whatever she was involved in, it was dangerous. And the worst part? I couldn't even be sure who she was protecting, me or herself. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to unravel everything. I was going to confront her, not about the affair, but about the money, the secret she was keeping. Whatever it was, it had gone on long enough. I waited until she left for another one of her mysterious meetings before pulling out the papers my advisor had sent. I spread them across the table, each line of numbers like a knife twisting in my gut. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, manipulation, and I had no idea how deep it went. The phone buzzed again. Another message from my advisor, this time with a name I didn't recognize, Jared Kingston. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. The man in the hotel, Jared Kingston. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was funneling money through her. And Maya, she was letting it happen. The cold fury that settled in my chest was sharper this time, more focused. This wasn't just about a man and a woman having an affair. This was a con, a scheme, and Maya was right in the middle of it. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. The papers were still spread out across the kitchen table when Maya came home that evening. I sat there, waiting. I hadn't touched dinner, hadn't moved much at all since I'd pieced everything together. My mind was a war zone, caught between confronting her outright and holding back just enough to keep her talking. If I pushed too hard, she might clam up. If I played it wrong, I'd lose any chance of finding out how deep this went. The door clicked open, and Maya stepped inside, her heels tapping softly on the floor as she walked in. She didn't notice the papers at first, just smiled at me. That same hollow smile I'd come to recognize over the past few weeks. "Hey, babe," she said, setting her bag down. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, feeling the tension in my jaw tighten. Her eyes flickered to the table. She froze. "What's this?" she asked, her voice too controlled. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the undercurrent of panic. She stepped closer, glancing down at the papers. Her hand hovered over them, but she didn't touch them. "Ethan, what is this?" "It's what you've been hiding from me," I said, my voice low, barely containing the fury boiling beneath the surface. "The money, Jared, your little side business." Her face paled. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes darted over the documents, scanning them. Then she looked up at me, her expression hardening. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "It's complicated." I stood up, pushing the chair back roughly. "Complicated? Don't give me that bullshit, Maya. You've been siphoning money out of our accounts and working with him, Jared Kingston. I saw you. I followed you to that hotel." Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic before she caught herself. She closed the distance between us, her hands outstretched, pleading. "Ethan, please listen to me. It's not what you think. He's dangerous." I laughed, a harsh sound that I barely recognized as my own. "Dangerous? That's the best you can come up with? You've been sneaking around with him for months. The messages, the hotel, the money, it's all right here." I jabbed my finger at the papers, my voice rising. "What the hell are you involved in, Maya?" She flinched, her face tightening with fear. "Or was it guilt?" "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice cracking. "He's been blackmailing me, Ethan. He has something on me, on us. If I didn't do what he wanted, he was going to destroy everything. I've been trying to protect you." "Protect us? Protect us?" I spat the words out like poison. "By having an affair and funneling money into God knows what?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I didn't trust her anymore. Not after everything. Not after what I'd seen. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't want to do it. Jared, he has dirt on me. On us. On the company. If I didn't go along with him, he would have ruined us. You expect me to believe that?" I snapped. "That this is all some big scheme to protect me? That you're the victim here?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's the truth, Ethan. I never wanted any of this, but Jared, He's been pulling the strings from the start. He approached me months ago. He found a way into the company, and once he had access, he started threatening me. If I didn't help him siphon the money, he was going to expose everything. I narrowed my eyes at her, the fury bubbling just beneath the surface. Expose what? She hesitated, her lips trembling, before she finally spoke. Jared has been laundering money through your company, Ethan. He's been using me to do it, forcing me to move the funds so it wouldn't be traced back to him. If I didn't do it, he would have gone to the police. He has documents, recordings, everything. He could pin it all on you. My stomach churned. I wanted to believe her, but every word felt like another layer of manipulation. And what about the affair, Maya? I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. Was that part of the blackmail too? Her face crumbled. No, she whispered. That was a mistake. I felt the room spin, the weight of her confession hitting me like a punch to the gut. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't feel anything but the numbness spreading through my chest. I didn't love him, she said quickly, stepping closer, trying to reach for me. I swear to you, Ethan, it was never about him. It was about surviving. I thought if I kept him happy, I could keep us safe. I stepped back, shaking my head. You think that makes it better? You think that erases what you've done? She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. I was trying to protect you, she repeated, her voice breaking. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. I stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Her words echoed in my head, but I didn't know what to believe anymore. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was tangled in a web of lies and betrayal that went far beyond infidelity. I needed time to think. I needed time to figure out what the hell was happening. But most of all, I needed to know the truth. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice hoarse. I need some air. Maya's face crumpled, but she didn't stop me as I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't clear my head. My thoughts were a mess, spinning out of control as I walked aimlessly down the street, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Was she telling the truth? Had she really been blackmailed, or was this just another layer of deception? And if she was telling the truth, how far had this gone? How deep was I already in, without even knowing it? The pieces didn't fit together. Not yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't just dealing with an affair anymore. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. And I had no idea how far it would go. The next morning, I couldn't get Maya's words out of my head. They echoed over and over, her voice trembling with fear, pleading for me to believe her. I was trying to protect you, but the more I thought about it, the more the doubts festered. Maya had always been clever, calculating when she needed to be. Was this just another move in her game? Was I just another piece on her board? She acted normal when I finally returned home late that night, as if the tension from our confrontation had evaporated. But the energy between us was different now, charged, electric. She watched me with careful eyes, gauging my reactions. I knew she was waiting for my next move. For the next few days, we danced around each other, pretending life was the same, though nothing felt the same anymore. I'd catch her glancing at me from across the room, that careful expression on her face. Sometimes she looked afraid, other times almost relieved, but something in her had shifted too. She wasn't the only one playing a game now. I started my own investigation, digging into Jared's background. It wasn't easy. Jared Kingston was a name I hadn't heard before, but his reputation painted a clear enough picture. A slick con artist, notorious for targeting wealthy women, making them believe they were in control until he drained their accounts dry. There were rumors about him, whispers of deeper connections and organized crime, though nothing ever stuck. But what troubled me more was the trail of destroyed lives he left behind. 2 other women, from what I could gather. One ended up bankrupt, the other disappeared. No one had heard from her in over a year. Maya had said she was trying to protect us from him. But was she protecting herself more than anything? How long had she known what Jared was capable of? And how far had she gone to keep herself safe? That night, after the house was quiet and the air between us had settled into uneasy silence, I made my next move. I needed answers, and Maya wasn't going to give them willingly. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I set up a hidden camera in the kitchen. The next day, while Maya was out, I went through her things again. I knew her routine now. She was meticulous, even with her deceptions. She'd never leave anything obvious lying around. But hidden away in the back of her wardrobe, behind a stack of old clothes, I found a small black notebook. Inside, scribbled in her familiar handwriting, were names, amounts, and dates, each one tied to a transaction. A large sum moved out of one account and into another. My heart pounded as I recognized some of the dates. They matched up perfectly with the unexplained withdrawals I'd seen in our accounts. But it was the name on one of the pages that made my blood run cold. Jared. Next to it, a note. 50% by the end of the month. Keep Ethan out. I sat down, staring at the words, my mind racing. Maya wasn't just a victim. She was deeply involved. She'd been planning this with Jared, working with him to move the money to cover their tracks. And the worst part? She'd known all along. The words "keep Ethan out" burned in my mind, mocking me. I felt a surge of anger, so intense, I nearly threw the notebook across the room. I'd been so blind. I'd let her manipulate me, convince me that she was just a pawn in Jared's scheme. But she was part of it. She was actively part of it. I needed to confront her, but not yet. I had to be smart about this. I had to be sure. So I waited. I needed to see how she acted when she thought she was alone. That evening, I set the hidden camera to record and left the house early. I told her I had to work late, but in reality, I parked a block away and waited, watching from a distance. Hours passed and nothing happened. But just as I was beginning to lose hope, I saw him, Jared. He arrived at our house, like it was nothing, like he belonged there. They hadn't even bothered to keep up the pretense anymore. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body tense as I watched him walk inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I imagined what they were saying, what they were plotting. The idea of him being in my house, so close to Maya, made my blood boil. I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to know what was happening, and the camera I'd set up would give me the answers. When I returned home later that night, Maya was already in bed. I said nothing, just slipped under the covers beside her, my mind replaying the image of Jared walking through our front door. Every breath I took was controlled, deliberate. If I showed even a hint of what I knew, the game would be over. And I wasn't ready to end it yet. The next morning, while Maya was in the shower, I reviewed the footage. There they were, sitting in the kitchen like they had every right to be there. Maya spoke in hushed tones, her words barely audible, but I could make out enough. "You need to wrap this up," she said to Jared, her voice shaking. "Ethan's getting suspicious. I can't keep this up much longer." Jared leaned in closer, his voice smooth, oozing confidence. "Relax. It's almost done. Just keep playing your part." My blood turned to ice. Playing her part. All this time, she'd been playing a role. The scared wife, the victim of blackmail. It was all an act. She wasn't afraid of Jared. She was working with him. She was in on it. I shut the laptop, my hands trembling. The rage I'd felt before was nothing compared to what I felt now. She had manipulated me from the start, made me believe she was the victim, when in reality, she was as guilty as he was. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I had to figure out my next move, and fast. I wasn't just dealing with an affair anymore. I was dealing with a woman who was willing to destroy everything, and I was the only one who could stop her. I stared at the closed laptop, the weight of what I'd just witnessed crashing over me. Maya wasn't the woman I thought I knew. The pieces were falling into place, but the full picture was more terrifying than I had imagined. She wasn't just a victim of Jared's manipulation. She was complicit, playing her part in whatever scheme they were running. I had been nothing more than a pawn to them, a useful idiot to be kept in the dark while they moved their money, pulled their strings. My stomach churned, anger rising in my chest. I couldn't let this continue. I wasn't going to be their puppet. I needed a plan, but first, I needed to confront Maya, this time for real. No more hiding behind her lies. No more games. That night, I sat in the living room, waiting. She was out again, probably with Jared, plotting God knows what. My mind raced, filled with dark images of what they were doing, of how far she'd fallen into this. When I heard the key turn in the lock, my muscles tensed. This was it. She stepped inside, her face composed, but I could see the flicker of something in her eyes when she saw me sitting there. Was it fear? Surprise? She smiled softly, trying to play it off. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "You're up late." I didn't move. "Where were you?" She paused, the smile faltering. "Just out with some friends." "Why?" "Cut the bullshit, Maya." I snapped, my voice cold. "I know about Jared. I know what you've been doing with him. And I know you've been lying to me this whole time." Her face paled, but she recovered quickly, her eyes hardening. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the messages. I followed you to the hotel. I know everything." My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "You've been working with him, siphoning money from the company, and now you're telling him to wrap things up because I'm getting suspicious? You've been playing me this whole time." Her eyes flashed with panic, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Don't bother lying. I heard you, Maya. I recorded you. You and Jared sitting right here in this house, talking about how you're going to finish me off." The room was deathly quiet, her face frozen in shock. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at me. Her lips parted slightly as if she couldn't find the words. And then something changed. The fear in her eyes melted away, replaced by something else. Something darker. Her posture straightened, and she gave me a small, almost pitying smile. "So you finally figured it out," she said softly, her voice dripping with cold amusement. "Took you long enough." I felt the floor drop out from under me. She wasn't going to deny it. She wasn't going to beg for forgiveness. She had been caught, and she didn't care. "I did what I had to," she said, stepping closer, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "You were never supposed to find out, Ethan. But now that you have, well, I guess there's no point pretending anymore, is there?" My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "You were going to destroy everything. The company, our life. All for what? For him." She laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "This was never about love. Don't be so naive. Jared was a means to an end. We were planning this for months, long before you even noticed something was wrong. And you? You were always a part of the plan. You just didn't know it." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Jared wasn't just blackmailing me, Ethan," she said, her voice lowering to a whisper. "We were in this together. The money, the deals, it was all part of the plan to move the funds and disappear before you could figure it out." She took another step forward, her eyes gleaming with a predatory look. "I never loved him. Hell, I never even loved you." Her words cut through me like a knife. But before I could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. I froze, my eyes darting toward it. Maya's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something like panic flicker across her face. "Don't answer it," she said quickly, her voice tight. But I was already moving toward the door. I opened it to find Jared standing there, his face calm, almost amused. He looked past me, straight at Maya. "Time's up." Maya's composure cracked. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice sharp. Jared stepped inside, his eyes flicking between the two of us. "Ethan knows everything, doesn't he? Seems like your plan didn't work out so well." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Jared wasn't just here for Maya. He was here for me, and I was standing in the middle of something I barely understood. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. But Jared only smiled, shaking his head. "I don't think you understand the situation, Ethan. Maya's been playing you, sure, but it was never about the money. This goes deeper than you realize." Maya's eyes widened in real fear now. "Don't," she whispered. Jared ignored her. He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "She was supposed to keep you in the dark, keep you compliant. But now that you're awake, you're a liability." I felt my blood run cold. "What the hell is this?" Maya's voice cracked. "Jared, don't." But Jared wasn't listening. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket, his expression calm, almost bored. "This was always going to happen, Ethan. You were never meant to survive this." Maya made sure of that. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're not going to get away with this." Jared smiled again, leveling the gun at me. "Who's going to stop me?" Before I could react, Maya lunged at Jared. The movement was so fast, so desperate, that I didn't even register it until they were both on the floor, struggling for control of the weapon. The sound of the shot echoed through the room like thunder. I stumbled back, my ears ringing, my vision blurring as I watched them struggle. Maya's hands were slick with blood. Whether it was hers or Jared's, I couldn't tell. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching from a distance, unable to move, unable to think. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the struggle stopped. Jared lay still, his chest unmoving, the gun clutched in Maya's trembling hands. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She started, but the words caught in her throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, the world was still, the only sound the ringing in my ears. Jared's body lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The gun slipped from Maya's hand, clattering onto the hardwood, and her wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine. I didn't mean to, she started, her voice breaking, but I couldn't hear her anymore. My mind was somewhere else, spinning through the chaos of the last few minutes, the last few months. I looked down at Jared's lifeless form, then back at Maya, my wife, the woman I'd spent years building a life with. And the truth of it all came crashing down on me. She had killed him. In one reckless moment, she had ended Jared's life. But the question burning in my chest wasn't whether she'd meant to kill him. It was whether she had done it for me or to save herself. I took a step back, the weight of the room pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Maya's voice trembled as she tried to explain, tried to make sense of the madness. Ethan, listen to me, please, he was going to kill you. I had to. Stop. I whispered, my voice hoarse. Just stop. She froze, her eyes filling with tears, but I couldn't trust those tears. I couldn't trust anything anymore. The woman standing before me wasn't the woman I had loved. She was a stranger, a liar, a killer. My heart pounded in my chest, the betrayal twisting deeper. All this time, she'd manipulated me, deceived me, played her role to perfection. Even now, I didn't know if this was part of her plan. Was Jared's death just another move in her game? Had she gotten rid of him because he was no longer useful to her? Maya took a step toward me, her voice soft and pleading. Ethan, you have to understand. I didn't have a choice. Jared was going to kill you, and then he was going to come after me. I had to do it. For us. I shook my head, barely able to focus. For us? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. Or for you? She flinched, but her expression hardened, her fear giving way to something colder, something more familiar. I did what I had to do, she said, her voice steady now. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be stuck in the middle of Jared's schemes? I was trying to protect us, Ethan. I was trying to survive. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Survival. That's what it had all been about from the very beginning. Maya wasn't driven by love or loyalty. She was driven by survival. And in her world, survival meant doing whatever it took to stay ahead, even if it meant betraying the one person who trusted her. I looked down at Jared again, his blood still spreading across the floor. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do now? Call the police? Explain that my wife had just killed a man in our living room? I imagined how it would play out. The questions, the investigation, the lies. Maya would weave her story, the perfect victim in a deadly scheme, and I would be forced to play my part. Maybe she would walk free, paint herself as the woman who had no choice, the wife who was forced into a corner. And me? I'd be left holding the pieces, wondering how much of it had been real. Maya's voice broke through my thoughts. We can fix this, she said quietly, stepping closer. We can make it look like self-defense. I'll say Jared came after me, threatened me, and you weren't here. It'll work. We'll get through this. I stared at her, my mind numb. She was already planning her next move, already thinking of how to clean up the mess. And in that moment, I realized something. She was right. We could make this go away. Jared was a criminal. After all, the police wouldn't dig too deep if the story held. And if Maya played the part of the terrified wife, she might even win their sympathy. We could walk away from this, no one the wiser. But at what cost? I stepped back, putting more distance between us. You think we can just bury this? I asked, my voice shaking with the weight of it all. Bury him? Maya's expression was calm now, controlled. Yes, she said simply. If we want to survive. Survive. That word again. It hung in the air like a curse. I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time. This woman I had once loved. This woman who had shared my life, my home, my bed. And now she was offering me a choice. To stay by her side, to help her cover up a murder, to pretend that everything could go back to the way it was. Or to walk away and let the consequences fall where they may. The room was suffocating. The weight of Jared's body, of Maya's lies, pressing down on me. I could walk away. I could call the police, let them deal with the fallout, let the truth come out. But that truth would destroy everything. My life, my career, everything I had built. And for what? For the sake of exposing her lies? Or I could do what she was asking. I could bury it. Bury the truth along with Jared. And maybe, just maybe, we could survive. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My decision was already made. Maya watched me carefully, her eyes never leaving mine. She knew. She could see it in my face. I was choosing her. I was choosing survival. Because that's what we had both become. In the end, survivors. Get rid of the gun, I said, my voice hollow. We'll say it was self-defense. She nodded, relief washing over her face. But behind that relief, I saw something else, victory. She had won. As she moved to clean up the scene, I stood there, staring at the lifeless body on the floor. Jared had been right about one thing. I was a liability. But now I was a liability Maya could control. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her accomplice.